Many of her favorite cartoons always made us laugh until we cried. But did you ever pay attention to how realistic some scenes were? And let me tell you, they were not happy scenes. Panic attacks kept showing up. So let's take a look at some of the most impressive panic attacks in cartoons. Who could forget our good friend Spongebob Squarepants? We've seen him freak out many times, but we've rarely seen him actually have a panic attack. For this video, we have to mention the time when he lost his identity. And I'm referring to this identity. Yes, his work ID. When one of the customers tried to thank SpongeBob, she couldn't do it because he no longer had his ID. SpongeBob begins to enter to extreme panic, and first he starts hyperventilating. Luckily, Squidward shows up to ask SpongeBob what's going on, and SpongeBob explains the situation. But this only makes him imagine the worst case scenarios, like someone finding his ID and using it to rob a bank while pretending to be SpongeBob. This definitely causes SpongeBob to panic even more and start hyperventilating again. To top it all off, Mr. Krabs announces that there will be a surprise uniform inspection in an hour, and anyone without a complete uniform will face his stinky boot. Of course, SpongeBob panics once again because of this whole situation. We've often seen SpongeBob act in a way that's meant to be funny, but this being one of the earlier seasons, it's one of SpongeBob's most realistic actions. We know he loves his job, he's very clean and organized, so losing that essential part of his uniform really pushed them to the edge of a psychological breakdown. In fact, he was so worried that he ended up fainting for a while. This panic attack, even though it became a meme, shows us very well what can happen if you don't control yourself. As we've seen, the best thing the brain can do in these situations is to simply cause a fainting spell so it can calm down and finally rest for a while. Alright friends, the show Ed, Edd n Eddy also gave us one of the most intense panic attack scenes. Specifically in the episode If It Smells Like an Ed, when Eddie is pressuring Jimmy and Ed to play dodgeball. We see them both start shaking and sweating in a very exaggerated way. He even double mentions that he starts seeing colorful things, flashbacks and memories, and at the climax of Ed's panic attack, he even collapses on the floor from the sheer unease he's feeling. Some might think that since it's a cartoon, they exaggerated everything to make it look funny, but all these symptoms are actually experienced in a real anxiety crisis. Sweating, shaking, irrational and death-related thoughts, and even crying and losing control. A pretty realistic scene depicting all these symptoms. Regular Show has many epic episodes, and there's one that represents panic attacks very well. It's the episode Hello Governor. Throughout this episode, we see Rigby feeling quite uneasy because he's afraid of English taxis due to a horror movie. In this episode, we don't just see panic attacks, we also see how he begins to suffer from paranoia and anxiety attacks. He has extremely irrational thoughts and even loses control of his emotions, and at certain moments he runs away. All of this just like people do in the middle of a panic attack. Additionally, we see how on several occasions Mordecai tells Rigby to calm down because he's safe. Of course, this doesn't help Rigby at all. This episode earns its place because while it seems like a pretty extreme case, it comes very close to reality. The next scene may seem very simple on the surface, but the entire backstory makes it a very deep scene. And it's related to the classic show Hey Arnold, a show that when we were kids we didn't realize had many dark things hidden within it. One of these scenes had to do with the panic attack Helga's sisters Olga had. When she visits her family, her parents focus all their attention on Olga. She seems like the perfect daughter, very successful and hasn't gotten anything less than A since the 3rd grade. But Helga feels very envious of her, as it's obvious that her parents don't love her as much, and clearly prefer Olga. Helga notices that a letter arrives with her sister's grades, and she decides to alter this letter so that one of the grades shows a B+. During dinner, Helga gives this letter to her sister, who begins reading it in front of everyone. As soon as she realizes she got a B+, her parents are shocked. Olga starts crying and looks completely depressed, to the point where she runs off and locks herself in a room. She spends the whole day lying down, saying she'll never leave that house again. Sai said it might seem like a very simple scene where they just wanted to exaggerate the girl's behavior. But friends, this panic attack actually has very good reasons behind it. As adults, we realize the favoritism her parents show towards Olga and the complete disregard they have for Helga. Plus, her parents were always abusive, and there were addictions involved between them. The fact that Olga experienced all this from a young age tells us that it definitely left her with many traumas. And now, being the center of her parents' attention and the role model to follow, it definitely added a huge mental burden on her. Many things to worry about and always ensuring she would never fail. As soon as she realized she made a small mistake, her mind completely collapsed. She began to have many negative thoughts that overwhelmed her to the point where she couldn't stop crying for days. And up to this point, we see that it not only caused her a horrible panic attack, but she also fell into a depression crisis. Just imagine, she couldn't even get out of bed and wasn't eating anything. This scene is ranked here because it depicts a panic attack that many of us might never experience, but the fact that it is a very real situation and could definitely happen to someone adds several points. And we've reached the top 2 spots, with the second place going to the Amazing Digital Circus. Didn't you notice? It was Pomni herself who had not one, but several panic attacks throughout the entire first episode. The first is right when she arrives at the Digital Circus and starts to panic because she doesn't know where she is or who the other characters are. She starts shaking and freaking out because she doesn't know where she ended up. Ragatha tells her to calm down, but Pomni just explodes. And in fact, this entire episode shows us something very important. After experiencing an anxiety crisis, it often doesn't happen again for a long time. But with Pomni, this anxiety never disappears, which is why she has several panic attacks. The fear and anxious thoughts are present throughout the entire episode. She suffers so much stress, and worse, she's left completely traumatized when they face the Queen glowing, which could have definitely caused her post-traumatic stress. I say this because at the end of the episode, we see how Pomni tries to escape her mind and ends up paralyzed, as if she were in a state of shock. And let me explain that this state Pomni is in the end of the episode is nothing more than a way the brain protects itself from stress and all the negative thoughts. Up to this point, many of us know that the Ren and Stimpy show was a completely controversial show, but one of its episodes can show us how one person's panic attack can severely affect others. And I'm talking about the episode A Visit to Anthony. Here we see how Ren and Stimpy receive letters from their biggest fans, and here Anthony asks them to please visit him since they are his favorite characters. Of course they feel touched by the letter, so they decide to visit him, which turns out to be a bad idea. Apparently, Anthony is a completely spoiled and overprotected child by his parents, behaviors that can definitely corrupt a child. The first panic attack Anthony has is right when he invites Ren and Stimpy to his room. Anthony asks Ren to do the trick where he can make his eyes really big. Ren tells him he can't. And because of this response, Anthony begins to panic, which causes him to start hyperventilating. This, to me, would be the first red flag that this kid is mentally unwell. He reaches the point of panicking to manipulate people and get what he wants. Anyway, Ren and Stimpy end up pleasing the child, and actually everyone gets along very well, until the morning comes. Anthony wakes up. When he goes to the bathroom, he sees that Ren and Stimpy are using it, which for some reason breaks Anthony's illusions about cartoons. For him, it was completely surprising that these cartoons used the bathroom, which triggers a panic attack in Anthony. he starts hyperventilating again, to the point where his mom has to intervene to calm him down. It seems that Anthony's panic attacks are very common. He likely learned this trick to get others to do what he wanted. But he took it so seriously that anything that impressed him too much could cause an attack. This is where we meet Anthony's dad, who is the primary overprotective figure in the boy's life. He doesn't want anything to happen to Anthony, so he ends up threatening Ren and Stimpy, causing them to enter a mini state of panic. After that, they go outside to play with Anthony, but then Victor, the school bully, shows up and ends up beating them all up, which causes Anthony to have another panic attack that makes the poor boy faint. Here we can see how the overprotection given to Anthony made him mentally very delicate. In fact, it wasn't really Anthony's fault that he became so sensitive. It was his parents through their actions, who gradually made him so fragile to the point that he almost died. Anthony's father finds out about this and carries him to his room. Luckily, the boy is still alive, but now Ren and Stimpy are in big trouble. Anthony's father starts to scare them just by looking completely angry, and he even rips off his shirt. The poor characters begin to enter a state of panic, seeing how crazy this family is, especially Anthony's father. In reality, that fear and that state of not knowing what's gonna happen or what the character should do, practically that panic can be felt throughout the entire episode. It's as if Anthony's house had that vibe that makes you feel uneasy. The panic is practically contagious. In the end, because of all the panic they feel, Stimpy ends up vomiting on Ren, which makes Anthony's father laugh and lets them live. Even though Ren and Stimpy is a very wild cartoon, this episode truly showed a very realistic situation that both children and adults can experience. But well, tell me friends, do you know any other epic panic attack scenes in cartoons or animations? Leave your comments below.